Astronoid is a band that briefly floated into my awareness about 5 years ago with a track from their self-titled second album. I dug the track, enjoyed it, but admittedly I never got around to digging any further into their catalog for, no particular reason other than lack of additional bandwidth, basically, just didn't have the time. And then somehow I missed their third album altogether 3 years ago. No idea how that happened. So I gotta say I was rather pleased to see them again when their latest release got my attention. Very cool to see these guys back for another album. So of course, I had to jump into this one for a review to find out if they were still making music that I enjoyed. Turns out the answer is yes. Hey Brognoggins, Dave here, and this is Bleeding Edge with another album review as I blow through my late year end of season flurry. Just getting out all kinds of good stuff that's coming out right now, and I just got a little bit of time to review it all before November ends and December brings us to that most magical season of all, end of year lists. You thought I was going to say something else, didn't you? Haha. Happy holidays. Anyway, the album, Stargod, the band, Astronoid. This is their fourth album. Now, I'm not sure exactly what they intended for this album. They seem like a pretty intentional band who doesn't do much without some thought. But there's definitely a vibe going on here. And I'm not sure if they meant it or I'm just hearing it that way. But we will talk about that later. Meanwhile, who is Astronoid? Well, the band lined up is three people. Brett Boland on vocals and guitars and drums and additional synthesizers. He is also their primary songwriter. Daniel Schwartz handles bass and synthesizers, and Casey Aylward handles lead guitars. And they got a little bit of a guest spot, some additional vocals on the song Third Shot, performed by Noah Boland. No relation. I lie, I have no idea. I assume she or he. You know what? It just dawns on me. I read Noah the first time as N-O-A, as female. I don't know why. Then as I say it out loud, I hear N-O-A-H, as in the biblical name. So it could be a dude. I don't actually know. And my apologies for that. Maybe, just maybe, this person is non-binary and neither apply. It's all good with me. I don't care. Meanwhile, Brett and Daniel were the ones that handled the engineering and the mixing. I am calling them producers, despite the fact that the album credits don't list anybody with the specific title producer. Seems pretty self-produced to me. So that's what I'm calling it. So this album is interesting. It is an album that on the surface you may not realize what the concept is behind it. And it's an album about dealing with life and its uncertainties and its pain, especially the loss of loved ones. The whole album itself is dedicated to, quote, all we have lost, unquote. But rather than being morose or mournful, as one might expect with a concept of that nature, it's much more hopeful and optimistic. It's an album that's really about looking at finding, I guess, the wonder in the unknown, finding comfort with uncertainty, and finding a way to move past loss, to move beyond loss, accept it, and continue with life. And so it's a pretty cool message, I think, overall. And it's a pretty cool idea for a concept. The therapist in me is very intrigued when I read about that. But before we get into the breakdown and the specifics, quick reminder here, if you don't mind, please drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you could, help Bleeding Edge grow. I'd really appreciate it. Meanwhile, here is my methodology. If you don't know, if you're new to this little exercise, I break every album down into 4 categories: intellectual, innovative, technical, and emotional. Score them all 1 to 5, average those scores out. That gets a raw number. If the raw number reflects how I felt about the album, it stays. If it doesn't, I will add or subtract a personal enjoyment modifier, as I call it. And that's how I take the objective and make it more subjective. I do my best to try to be objective in how I look at these things, but I'm human and I am not entirely capable of true objectivity. Getting philosophical here all of a sudden. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, all right. So we start off, as always, with intellectual. So as I said, it's a rather cool concept. And certainly one that resonates with me as a counselor. In all honesty, these are a lot of things I've ended up talking about with people during therapy sessions and talking about the idea of learning to find comfort with uncertainty, to find ways to resolve ourselves, to coexisting with the anxieties and the uncertainties. That's a life task, really. People struggle with it all the time. And if they're not careful, that anxiety can weigh them down massively. I talk about grieving a lot. And how it's really, in many ways at least, as I look at it, more about the importance of acknowledging not the importance of acknowledging, but acknowledging the importance of those we've lost, flipping my words around, rather than just dwelling on the loss itself. The reason the loss hurts and the reason the loss is painful is because that person touched our lives somehow, or that situation, or that house, or that job, whatever. Loss is loss. And it's important to us, and it hits us the way it does because we cared about it and because it touched us in a way. And this album is really putting forth a message of resilience, which I like. It's an idea of, hey, how do we survive these things? They are all part of life. And what about surviving them? What about not lingering by the graveside, as I call it, but moving onward and living life, or not letting the fact that anytime you step out the door, something bad could happen and deciding that means you need to lock yourself in the house and never leave it. That's not living as much as it is existing. So the biggest problem I ran into with this album in and of itself is one I run into on occasion is I didn't have a lyric sheet. I didn't have anything to tell me exactly what was being said. And that put a little more onus on me to listen hard and push my ADHD brain to stay focused and listen to the words without getting distracted by the music or the squirrel at the window and all those other things. So I didn't necessarily catch all of them. And I'll be honest, they're very poetic and a bit vague. They leave a lot of space for the listener to provide their own interpretation and provide their own meaning. At the same time, they left me at times thinking, I'm not sure what we're talking about, but I vaguely feel that it is rather optimistic and it is rather hopeful. IQ did the same thing to me earlier this year, where I just, whatever lyrics I did have or heard, I could read them and hear them over and over again and still not be sure where are we going with this. So in some ways that takes away from it a little bit. It's good to have some room for interpretation, and there's other times too where maybe it goes too far one direction and leaves me kind of clutching at straws, wondering what's being talked about. That could be me being a little dense. Maybe that's it. Maybe sometimes I don't always pick up on the more poetic of things and need it to be spelled out a little more. Anyway, but as has been my habit, when I don't entirely understand what's being written, sung, said, but I know there's definitely some intellect behind it and some thought behind it, I'll do what I always do. I score it a 4. I know there's something smart going on there. I'm just not always entirely sure exactly what it is from moment to moment. That's my failing. And maybe it's something I need to live with the lyrics a little bit longer than I'm able to in order to turn these reviews out in a timely manner after the album is released. All right, moving on to innovative. This, as an album, to me, represents a very interesting evolution. Now, as I mentioned, I'd heard one or two of their songs before. It's about as far as I went. So as far as getting to know this album, I thought, I'm going to go back because there's something happening here that I don't remember previously. So I'm going to blow through some of their older songs and see what the difference is. And in doing so, one, I got turned on to some very cool music that I've been missing that I'll have to dig into more later. But number two, I also got to better understand that what I was hearing definitely wasn't necessarily the same as they've been historically. And there is an evolution going on here. Previously, this was a band that is very much, more in the category of post-metal, as much as maybe prog metal, but post-metal and very intricate stuff that goes beyond what you typically hear. Think in terms of bands like Pelican. I think it's a good example. Very expansive, very cinematic. Not exactly usual metal, but having those elements there just kind of mixed in a different way. They're like Pelican, but with vocals. At least they were. For me, in the past, the vocals and the music to me didn't always feel 100% connected. I mean, they went together and they formed a song, but there was always this feeling to me a little bit like the music was composed on its own. The lyrics were added later, and so they were basically created separately. Based on the writing credits, that kind of makes me wonder if that's really the case, but I don't know. But that's the way it came across. They fit together, but it didn't feel like they were organically together, so to speak, that they were organically cohesive. Just the way it felt. And this one felt much more like that. It felt much more like these lyrics, the vocal melodies, and the musical harmonies were created as a whole, that they were more cohesive and fit together and complemented each other more directly. And I kind of called it being symbiotic rather than coexisting. Both things can be good, but for me, the symbiosis of the lyrics, the vocals, and the music worked kind of nicely in this album. And it really, I think, pulled me in. It made the music more immediately accessible, more memorable, and certainly in my mind, more melodic. There's almost some pop-level hooks going on in this album, which is not something that was really what they did before. So definitely a compositionally different approach, shifted towards more straightforward instrumentation and arrangement. We'll get more into that a little bit later. But all this also blends into something of a more pop-infused product. And for me, I don't know about the rest of you that have heard this or will be listening to this. Man, what an 80s vibe this thing has got going on. I have no idea if that's intentional or not. But throughout this album, I'm literally hearing keys and synths with tones that took me back to 1984. I'm seeing young Michael J. Fox traveling through time, neon colors, big hair, all those things that you associate with the 80s. Asia t-shirts with the band logo and the dragon and all that. Felt so 80s. And it's interesting when I say Asia comes to mind as well, because there are certain aspects of this that reminded me a little bit of songs by Asia or Cutting Crew or other bands of that time, especially the ones that critics dismissed as being at that moment pretentious, which I'm going to call bullshit on that. I'm like, I'm sorry. When you got guys coming from bands like Yes and King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Asia is what you decided to call pretentious? Stop it. Fortunately, time has been kind to Asia, and their music has been given a much more appropriate reassessment. I don't know about Cutting Crew, and I don't know that I'm saying I'm putting Cutting Crew on the same level with Asia, but I remember them getting lumped together at some point in time as being pretentious. Well, whatever little bit of levels of pretentious 80s rock, pop rock, whatever you want to call it, might be bleeding through in this album. I'm digging it. I'm enjoying it. Admittedly, it might not be for everyone. I don't know how the longtime fans are going to be feeling about this. They might not like the change. Not unusual for fans to dislike any change bands put forward, but especially if a band that they see as being serious suddenly shifts into something more accessible with a little bit more pop influence. Happened with Riverside with ID Entity a couple years back, and certainly I know there was some fussing about some of the songs sounding too pop. Well, deal with it, guys. I, for one, am enjoying it. I like that it's not a quantum jump forward and a huge jarring shift in their style and their songwriting, but it's definitely the evolution. Whatever, like it or dislike it, the evolution is evident. And I, for one, enjoyed it. I'm going to score this a 4, just for the evolution itself. Looking at the technical side, this is not what I would say is an album that exactly puts the full capability of these guys on display. As I mentioned, the arrangements are more streamlined. The melodies are more catchy, more immediate. The instrumental noodling that you might have associated with them is pared down notably. Where you used to hear a lot of guitar pyrotechnics and this wall of sound drum onslaught with the all over the place and very rarely something that's a steady beat. Right now, where those existed, you now find these more restrained arrangements, more straight ahead rhythmic drums, more layered keyboards. It's much more of a album of immediacy that people that might be jumping on for the first time, I think, might pick up on a little more easily than some of what they used to do. For good or bad, whether you think it's either or, it is what it is, I think. Their other albums are definitely the ones that put the full scope of their talents much more on overt display. But the restraint here, I think, is quite pleasant also. It's a nice shift. It's something different. They are not just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do and we're going to do this forever. They are evolving, and they're allowed to evolve. And matter of fact, I encourage it. When I think back to how bands evolved from album to album during the 80s especially, they were big jumps and big leaps, and each album had very distinct sounds to them. And you don't, I think, hear that quite as much, or at least not very commonly anymore. And I like this. And I don't know if they were listening to Kairos at some point in time recently and got infected with some of that 80s retro nostalgia. It's not blatant necessarily, but it's definitely there for my ears. So I'm going to score this category for what's on display, not as much as for what I know they can do when they're fully unleashed. So I'm going to score it a 3.75. I was wavering between a 4 and a 3.5. 3.75 is where I landed. And finally, we get to emotional. This, as I may have mentioned earlier, is a very uplifting, very hopeful album, despite what you might have expected from the potentially dark concepts that are behind it. That part I really enjoyed. The bright tones and major keys, these encouraging lyrics, even when I didn't always fully understand them, I was picking up on the message of encouragement and hopefulness. And I like that, like, let's be honest. It's a bit of a shift, a lot of progressive music, a lot of progressive metal. Oftentimes that has a pretty serious, if not dour, kind of feel to it. The lyrics might be very serious. They might be dark. The music might be more minor tone and more dark. And this is one of those ones that just suddenly pops in and brightens things up a little bit. And for the particular moment, that appeals to me. And to a certain degree, it even hits at an opportune moment as I think back to a recent video I put up instead of a review, because the day of that video, I found out that someone who very much had been a part of my life, even though I didn't really know him directly, at least for a span of time, but someone who was absolutely a part of my life and had touched me in my heart at some point, Pierre Robert, the iconic DJ of WMMR, had passed away. And the city and the station and a lot of us as listeners are still in mourning over that. And this comes along at a nice time as it talks about, looking back and recognizing and remembering the ways that these people were positive influences in our lives and the way they touched us in a good way, more so than just the fact that they're gone, more so than their death. And that's the part we can all carry forward. So it kind of touches at a nice time for me. So, I can't say it moved me massively, but the change of pace in the sound and the approach to me was quite welcome. Not in a big way, but I'm going to give it a 3.5. So, meanwhile, let's review very quickly. Intellectual got a 5, innovative 3, technical 4, emotional 3.25. And I actually didn't do that right because let me try that again. So let's start over. Intellectual 4, innovative 4, technical 3.75, and emotional 3.5. That's what happens when you're not careful in redoing your script and you're using an old template. Anyway, interesting thing is I didn't need to update the raw score. Somehow the math still came up as exactly the same as the last album I reviewed, 3.81, that unusual number. What are the chances? I couldn't have predicted that, but here you go. That's been my tendency anyway. A lot of things come up with similar scores. All right, so just my final thoughts on this. As I mentioned, as you might be picking up, I quite enjoyed this album from the very start when I first heard it. Really some epic moments, really some immediate things. Like some of it, again, I don't want to say too much. They're like, oh, look, there's just real straight ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, kind of rhythm, things like this. They opened the gates charging with some of these grand keys and very pretentious keys and blast beats and double bass and all this stuff. It's there's that moment where you're going, it's somewhere between Duran Duran and death metal. I don't know. Uh, it's just kind of very interesting that way. And so it grabs your attention, but it comes out the door with just a very fresh and different sound that what I've been hearing in recent months. And these guys have a very distinctive style. It's all their own. And I really have enjoyed that. For me, that shift is absolutely a nice direction. Their shift, their drift from, you know, more unusual, more, it's the word I'm looking for, avant-garde. There we go. More avant-garde post-metal into something that drifts almost into the pop side. Maybe a little far, but not too far for me in the end. It might be for others. I don't think they went too far with it, but I do. Again, I wonder how their longtime fans are receiving it. It's a bit of a shift, but I think they pull it off in a subtle enough way that it doesn't smack you in the face. It's not like they suddenly came out and they were an entirely different band. It just means that they've been doing what they've been doing in a somewhat different way, in a little more straightforward way. For me, the standout tracks, Stargod, again, immediately accessible. The melody just catches on right away. Strong 80s flavor. It's flowing. It's a propulsive tune. That one's the first one that really put me in that 80s mind. It's melodic. It's got a very cool crafted instrumental section with only a little bit of light noodling, a little bit of guitars, a little bit of keys, a little bit of both maybe at times. I had trouble telling if I wasn't listening closely, and sometimes they transition on me. Cool tune. Third shot for me, I think, is the biggest standout. It's got this very urgent, insistent intro with heavy on the keys and the guitar. They're both playing the same chords. Love the power chords that are in this song. They are absolutely epic. They are fire. The second half of the instrumental break, absolutely fire. Digging it. And there's even a tasty little solo in there. As I mentioned, there weren't a lot of examples of soloing going on here, whereas most of the music almost always had some guitar pyrotechnics, but not this one a little bit, but this one has a very cool one here. I like that. And final one, and it's funny, as I typed this up this very day, and again, the matter of saying it out loud sometimes, the third of my standout songs is Depressed Mode. And all of a sudden it hit me as I'm typing that up. I'm like, wait a minute, Depressed Mode, Depeche Mode. So that actually, if that is unconscious on their part, that's kind of funny. It gives me the impression that this 80s feel to it is not unintentional. It didn't just happen. It didn't just grow organically. It's kind of a matter of just something they were maybe trying to achieve. I don't know. But in the meantime, this one opens up with this grandiose, important sounding chords. Again, very, very pretentious 80s. Pulsing synths and keyboards underlaying the verse, and then they get the drums coming in and chugging guitars added for the bridge / chorus, and keyboard flourishes, synth flourishes, so reminiscent of 80s synth pop. It can't be an accident. I got to think so. It can't possibly be, and definitely probably the second best hook on the album after a third shot. And again, once again, the midsection breakdown, absolutely chef's kiss. At that point, they kind of eschew the 80s sheen and dive into some heavy post-metal sounds. And it's a reminder that this band is not from the 80s. They are, in fact, from the modern day. So in the end, looking at the score, looking at how I feel about this album, I think the score represents it pretty well. It fits in there quite nicely with things I've heard recently that I've really enjoyed and things I've heard throughout the year that I've quite enjoyed, but puts it up there. These guys are absolutely, for me, on the album of the year list, top albums of the year list. They definitely have a song that is the running for song of the year contender. Certainly, almost certainly going to be on that list. Solid effort on their part. So I'm glad they came around again. I'm glad I didn't miss them for a second album. Meanwhile, the rest of you, what are your thoughts? How are the Astronoid fans handling this evolution? Hi, I talk for a living. Too far for you? Does it feel like a natural progression? I don't know. You guys let me know. Drop something in the comments below. While you're there, if you didn't subscribe yet, do that now, please. I would much appreciate it. And that is all I have for you at the moment. Got another review coming up in a couple of days. Yep, I told you, late year flurry. And finally, I leave you with the usual reminder to never fear to deviate from the norm. And as always, keep it proggy.